Christmas Eve 2008, a young girl opens the door to see Santa Claus, but it appears there's something under his outfit. She assumes that it's presents for her and the rest of her family, so she runs to give him a hug, but is instead shot in the face with a 9mm bullet. The man dressed as Santa, 45-year-old Bruce Pardo, proceeds to kill 9 of her family members and set the house on fire with a gift-wrapped flamethrower. Bruce's divorce had been finalized 1 week before the massacre, and the house he burned down was where his ex-wife and her family were celebrating Christmas. He had no criminal record and no past history of violence, and following the attack, Bruce drove to his brother's house and took his own life. I've done the full breakdown of the case here, and it is haunting.
This is the moment Alexi threw her newborn baby in the trash.
Hospital surveillance video shows Treviso leave her patient room at 1:38 a.m., waddling toward the bathroom while clutching her back. Treviso remains in the bathroom for 19 minutes as multiple people check on her.
I knocked on the door and I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yes, I'm fine. I'm just having a hard time going to the bathroom," is what she replied. So I was like, okay.
Surveillance video captures that moment as Treviso leaves the bathroom and heads back to the patient room. It was then that hospital staff got a look at the bloody bathroom for the first time.
And all I saw was like blood everywhere, like on the walls, on the toilet. It just looked like a horror film.
Police speak to multiple people who saw the bathroom, describing fresh blood on the walls, floor, and near the toilet.
The toilet's right here where you're at, and then the sink's right here. It was like up this way, blood splatter.
What if,
like,
in your line of work, what would cause that kind of splatter?
I think something that got pulled out.
The story of Jean Dulac and his evil doll. So in the early 1900s, Jean Dulac was one of the most famous ventriloquists in all of vaudeville. His doll not only looked like it was speaking on its own, but it appeared to move on its own and also had a voice completely different from Jean's. This confused a lot of his fans, but they mostly chalked it up to his talent. But others felt there was something slightly sinister about the doll. Reports that the doll was sometimes caught speaking even when it wasn't on Jean's hand. Missy Waters, a vaudevillian dancer and Jean's lover, claimed that one night she walked into Jean's room to find the doll off of his hand and Jean on the other side of the room curled up in a ball crying. She said a voice was coming from the doll speaking Latin, and it clearly was not Jean. The more Jean used the doll, the sicker he got too, and within a few years of his success, he was on his deathbed. And apparently right before he died, he asked to make a call to Missy. According to her, on that phone call, Jean said it was the devil inside of the doll. He said that he had bought the doll off a man traveling through town with the understanding that if he let the devil live inside the doll, he would have all the fame and fortune he desired. His last words were, "Do not let anyone have this doll after I die." The whereabouts of the doll are currently unknown.
Steve Banerjee is a multimillionaire known for his extremely successful male striptease company, but he has a dark secret. In 1975, Steve turned a Los Angeles bar into a male strip club called Chippendales. However, his business partner Nick DeNoia took all the credit. After Nick appeared on famous talk shows who called him Mr. Chippendales, Steve hired a hitman to have him murdered. And after Nick was shot and killed in 1987, Steve became even more bloodthirsty and money hungry. He arranged the killings of 2 men involved with his biggest competitor, but this time, the hitman became a source to the FBI, and Steve was arrested shortly after. But before he received his sentence, Steve hanged himself in prison so his ex-wife could take over the Chippendales brand. There is a lot more to this story, so if you want to watch the morbid details, check out Hulu's Welcome to Chippendales, inspired by true events, available on November 22nd.
Tampa Bay Rays player Wander Franco is under investigation by the MLB for having a relationship with a 14-year-old girl. So this past Sunday, rumors began to swirl on social media that Wander Franco was involved with a minor. And ironically, that day on the game he was set to play in, they were going to give away a signed hat of his to a child in attendance. But he didn't end up playing in the game. And this all stems from photos that have surfaced online showing him being very, very inappropriate with a 14-year-old. I mean, just take a look at these pictures right here. So again, nobody knows what the deal is with all these pictures. I couldn't find many details myself, but I mean, when just looking at this stuff, you can tell that there's something wrong. Wander has currently not been traveling with his team for the upcoming games. Like I said, he skipped out on Sunday's game. According to him, it was just a day off, but obviously with the scandal going on, we know what happened. And reportedly, authorities are now looking into him and this relationship that he allegedly has with this 14-year-old girl. Even though Wander Franco himself has denied doing anything that he's being accused of, I'm anxious to see what's going to come out of this and what details are going to come out in the next days or weeks. Because for somebody with so much clout, a 22-year-old to be going out with a 14-year-old is obviously not okay. And if it is true, he should definitely face full repercussions.
So more and more sightings of the Smiling Man have been reported recently. For those who don't know, the Smiling Man is a very tall, odd-looking man who wears this creepy grin and is often caught trying to steal children, as was the case with a young girl named Linda. Years ago, Linda lived in West Virginia, and one night she awoke to strange sounds in her bedroom. She rolled over to go back to sleep, but what she saw in her hallway was a tall, dark, shadowy figure. Linda closed her eyes in fear, and when she reopened them, he was standing right above her. She screamed and he disappeared, but recently there's been more reports of sightings. Legend has it, if you close your eyes at night and think the words "Smiling Man, Smiling Man, Smiling Man" over and over again, he'll appear. Would you try?
This teenager's life was cut short by horrific knife crime. Oliver King Onzilla had just celebrated his 19th birthday. He was a very promising young football player. He captained Barnet's youth team and the England College's FA team in a match against Italy. Teammates described him having amazing power and strength on the pitch. His future was looking extremely bright. However, this would all change on one tragic evening out in London. His mum would last speak to him on the 12th of September 2008. Tragically, this would be the last time she would speak to her teenage son. He was enjoying a night out with friends at Southend's E-Bar. This is when a commotion broke out involving 3 people. Oliver was stabbed at 1:15 a.m. He was rushed to a local hospital where he tragically passed away at 2:20 a.m. A post-mortem found that he died of stab wounds. Tristan Burke was given a minimum of 14 years in prison for the killing. Shockingly disgusting videos emerged online of Tristan posting from his prison cell. Videos show him wearing a balaclava while rapping about violence. Thankfully, the Ministry of Justice got his Instagram account taken down. Oliver's family made the brave decision to have him in an open casket at his funeral. He has a clear wound on his face, and the family wanted to do this in order to spread awareness about the destruction caused by knife crime.
Imagine being a realtor and walking into a home for a showing only to find the owners murdered. In 2017, billionaire Barry and Honey Sherman were found murdered in their home by their realtor as she conducted a showing. Barry owned Apotex, which is a pharmaceutical company in Toronto, and his net worth was about $3.2 billion at the time of his death. And on December 15th, 2017, a realtor walked into their home assuming that no one was there and found both of them murdered downstairs beside their indoor pool. When the realtor walked into the room, she saw what appeared to be 2 people laying on their backs and their necks tied to the pool railing. She quickly ran out and redirected the clients to another room so that they don't see. But what's strange is that when police arrived, they quickly ruled it a murder-suicide. They believed that Barry murdered his wife and then took his own life. But it was clear that this wasn't the case, because the way their bodies lay looked like they were deliberately positioned like that. They both had marks on their wrists, which were likely caused by zip ties, which is something that wouldn't be necessary in a murder-suicide. Many speculate that their son Jonathan had something to do with the murders, since Barry asked him to pay him back $50 million that he loaned him. Jonathan also had some resentment towards his father because he believed that his father was mismanaging the company's money. Now, what's crazy is that even though the case has not been solved, in 2019, their home was demolished at the request of their own kids. And in case you didn't know, Barry and Honey's house is about 20 minutes away from my house, so I went to go check it out.
50 Old Colony Road. This entire property has been boarded up. The case remains open and there are still no suspects. There is a $35 million reward for any information leading to an arrest.
Knifed to death outside his home, Ricky Hayden was just 27 years old when he became the victim of knife crime. Ricky's mum, Sue, has kindly given me permission to cover his story. She's been campaigning against knife crime ever since her son's death 7 years ago. It was September 13th, 2016, and Ricky was asleep at home when he was awoken by youths outside trying to steal his brother's moped. He ran down the stairs barefoot and completely unarmed to confront the thieves. Ricky was completely unaware that these youths were armed with machetes, and he was slashed across the thigh. This knife wound caused catastrophic bleeding. Ricky was taken to hospital, but it was too late, and later on that day his family had to make the heartbreaking decision to let him go. Ricky was a much-loved, cheeky chap with a kind, honest, caring nature, and his death absolutely devastated his family. And not just them. Due to how much Ricky was loved, the whole community was saddened by such a tragic, senseless loss. Ricky was loved by everybody that knew him. He was a security guard to the stars and had made something of his life, unlike his attackers. 19-year-old Tommy Roon went on trial and he was charged with manslaughter. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Another youth pleaded guilty to perverting the course of justice and was sentenced to 30 months in detention. Ricky's family have been absolutely crushed by his death, and his mum Sue continues to push for harsher sentences for people accused of knife crime. She wants people to know that knife crime doesn't just affect the victim, it affects everybody that they leave behind. Whole communities can be affected, and it needs to stop. She continues to raise money in her son's memory with the Ricky Hayden Memorial, and she's donated many bleed kits to places to save lives. Just this year, a teenager's life was saved with one of the kits that Sue donated, and she's making such a difference. Ricky's story will be covered on Killer at the Crime Scene on 5 Star on the 9th of October at 9 p.m. There's also a memorial being held for all parents and families of victims of knife crime at Westminster Abbey on the 21st of October at 1 p.m.
The policeman said he had never seen a case as horrific as this one in his entire career. When 16-year-old Kellyanne Bates told her mum about her boyfriend, she was shocked. Margaret lived with her daughter in Hattersley, England, and they lived a fairly ordinary life. However, Margaret was shocked to learn that her teenage daughter's boyfriend was in his mid-40s. Other than being unhappy about the obvious age gap, Margaret found her daughter's boyfriend, James Smith, deeply disturbing. Now, the pair had apparently met when Kelly was only 14 years old. They had been keeping their relationship secret until now. Soon after this, Kelly moved in with unemployed James. It seemed that as time went on, she became more quiet and reserved. On the odd occasion that her parents did see her, they noticed marks on her arms. Margaret tried to report this to police, but all police did was give her some leaflets to give to Kelly to try and encourage her to leave. Little did they know James had a dark past. He had actually been married before and had got divorced over allegations against him of DV. Other exes shared similar stories of abuse. It's believed that he once even tried to drown a 15-year-old girlfriend. James was unfortunately no different to Kelly. He would regularly abuse her, and the teenager suffered in silence. In April 1996, his violence reached a whole new level. On the 16th of April, he walked into a police station to announce that he had accidentally killed Kelly. He stated they'd had an argument while she was in the bath and she'd accidentally drowned. However, when police arrived at the pair's home, they found a horrendous scene. Police discovered Kelly's body and the house was smeared with her blood. The pathologist found over 150 injuries on her body, and these were determined to have taken place over a period of a month. The true horror of what Kelly went through is unimaginable. She had been tortured for weeks up to her death. James had starved her and tied her to a radiator by her hair. She'd been burned with an iron, strangled and stabbed. She had been scalped and her eyeballs were gouged out at least 5 days prior to him drowning her in the bath. Shockingly, there are even more horrific injuries if you would wish to Google these. At his trial, other abuse victims of James testified against him. James, however, argued that he was the real victim. He said, "She put me through hell, winding me up." In 1997, he was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison, and he remains there to this day.
Matt Lauer, the former host of The Today Show, is one of the most dangerous sexual predators in American history. A lot of you guys may have forgotten this story or don't know the details of this horrific story, but I'm going to remind you there are graphic details we're going to talk about, so viewer discretion is advised. So for decades, you couldn't turn on NBC News in the morning and not see this face, Matt Lauer. He was born in New York City in 1957, and years later he would work for the Today Show and become one of the biggest, most watched TV show hosts in the mornings. I certainly remember growing up watching NBC in the mornings, the Today Show, always seeing Matt Lauer. I mean, he was an integral part of morning news. And at one point, the Hollywood Reporter even named him the most powerful voice in news media. So obviously Matt Lauer had a lot of influence, a lot of famous friends, and a lot of power in the industry. So let's jump forward to 2017. At about the same time that all the charges were coming out about Harvey Weinstein being a sexual predator, suddenly Matt Lauer's name began to be published in the news. And no, it wasn't because he was reporting on the news himself. It was because he was a dangerous predator that was about to be exposed. So November 27th, 2017, Matt Lauer is randomly fired from the Today Show after working there for decades. And on that day, a message was sent to all NBC employees by the chairman, saying that they had terminated Matt because they had received a complaint about him about inappropriate sexual behavior in the workplace. And even though they said there was only one complaint, they said that they knew that there was something more. And at this point, this is when the true allegations began to come to light, and let me warn you again, some of these are really disturbing. So according to one employee that came out and told her story, Matt Lauer had been making inappropriate gestures and remarks about her since the late 1990s. And she said that in 2001, Matt Lauer had assaulted her. Apparently on that day, he had asked her to come to his office to discuss a story that he was working on. And then when she came in, he locked the door behind her, he asked her to take her shirt off, and then proceeded to assault her. Mid-assault, she passed out, and when she woke up, she was on the floor, and Matt Lauer was looking over her. He then asked one of his other workers to come help her out of his office and bring her to a nurse, which once again shows that people working around this guy who was in a position of power, just helped him carry out all of these crimes and were never checked on it. And this brings us to the infamous button on the desk. So yes, this is a proven fact that Matt Lauer had a button located on and under his desk. And when he pressed that button, he could lock the door to his office, effectively sealing whoever he had invited inside of his office inside. And this button plays a part in all of these accusations. Apparently Matt Lauer would lock people in his office and subject them to all of these assaults, inappropriate comments, inappropriate conduct, and they had no way of escaping because of this hidden button. Now, eventually, lots of former employees and coworkers would come out and say that Matt Lauer had assaulted them, and this disturbing pattern of inappropriate behavior became public knowledge. All of his former coworkers, including people like Katie Couric, said that they completely cut him off. And after his firing, Matt Lauer didn't receive a single penny from NBC. Now, one of the sad things about all of this is that no charges were ever formally brought against Matt Lauer, so even though he had assaulted lots of different women, he was never really punished for it other than losing his job and losing his favor in the public eye. But according to friends, Matt Lauer is now reserved. He doesn't go out, he doesn't see anybody. All of his famous friends have stopped talking to him, so I'm assuming that his life is miserable.
Have you ever wondered who this character is based on? It's loosely based on the real story of Barbara Sklova, and it's really, really disturbing. Quick trigger warning before I get into it, because the details are horrific and there's mentions of child abuse and cannibalism. Back in 2006, Barbara was living in the Czech Republic. She suffers from a glandular disease that makes her appear smaller and younger than she actually is, and she managed to convince people that she was a 13-year-old girl named Annika, when in fact she was 32. Annika managed to manipulate her way into this woman's life. This is Klara Marova, and she lived in the same area with her two sons, Andre and Jacob, who were 8 and 9. Klara liked to talk about her belief that she was destined to fulfill a mission from God, and her sister Katerina ended up joining a cult that was run by a man named Joseph. This cult believed that they were completely absolved to commit crimes, and the leader, Joseph, was actually Annika, or Barbara's, father. Their ideas and views were completely warped, and Barbara used this to her full advantage. Klara's sister Katerina actually knew full well that Annika was a 32-year-old woman, not a teenager, but Klara had no idea, and she began to treat her like a daughter. Due to ill health, Annika had lots of doctor's appointments, but she'd never let anyone go with her, and during these doctor's appointments, Klara began to receive really strange text messages and emails that she thought were from Annika's doctor. It's actually believed that it was Joseph. Annika's doctor claimed that Annika was being abused by Klara's two sons, and that they had to be cured of all evil. Of course, this was all lies. The boys were completely innocent. Clara became extremely abusive towards Andre and Jacob, beating them with her bare hands, wooden spoons and a belt. But in August 2006, the doctor said that these punishments weren't working and they had to try something else: shock therapy. Clara was instructed to take the boys to a cottage in the woods, and when she got there, her sister Katerina was waiting for her, with a man that's thought to be Annika's brother, and 2 other women, Jan and Hannah. This cottage became absolute hell on earth for the 2 boys. They were locked inside dog cages, barely big enough to sit up in. They were forced to eat from dog bowls and forced to sit in their own faeces and urine. They were shocked through the bars, and when they were let out of the cages, they were beaten by the whole group. And Annika would often tell the adults that the boys were bullying her because she knew that the punishments would be ramped up. The boys often had their heads submerged in water until they were close to drowning, and they had cigarette burns all over their bodies. That's not even the worst of it. Just a quick trigger warning again here, because the next part is absolutely horrific. The boys would be taken out of the cages and they'd have parts of their body skinned. So Clara and the rest of the group would remove skin from their legs and their buttocks, and then they would eat it. If that's not bad enough, they would also then force the boys to eat their own raw flesh. If they were sick, they'd make them eat that too. In September 2006, Clara decided to make Annika an official part of the family, and she adopted her. She then moved out of the cottage with Annika back to their house, closely followed by Katerina and the 2 boys. The abuse of the 2 boys started up again immediately. Annika was given her own room upstairs that was bright and colourful, whereas the boys were forced to sleep in the basement, often tied up and naked. This is when Clara set up a baby monitor in the basement to monitor the boys, and it was only by chance that they were rescued due to this baby monitor. The boys had suffered a further year of abuse in that basement, and then one evening one of the neighbours was checking his own baby monitor, and somehow the wires must have got crossed, and what appeared on his screen was Andre laying naked on the floor, tied up. He immediately called the police, and they went door to door until they found the 2 boys. Clara and Katerina were arrested, and the boys, along with Annika, went into care. This is when it was discovered that Annika was actually a 33-year-old woman, and it was too late by then because she'd managed to escape from the care home and flee to Oslo in Norway, where she began posing as a teenage boy. She was going by the name Adam, and she even enrolled in school and underwent breast reduction surgery and liposuction to appear more childlike. She was eventually found by the police and deported back to the Czech Republic, where she went on trial with Clara and Katerina. During the trial, all 3 women turned on each other and started to blame each other for the abuse. Barbara even went as far as saying that Clara and Katerina had abused her alongside the 2 boys, but the jury didn't believe her. Eventually, Katerina was sentenced to 10 years, Clara was sentenced to 9 years, and Barbara was sentenced to just 5 years, although she only served half of that sentence. Andre and Jacob recovered from the abuse after hospital treatment, and they were eventually adopted by an American family. Clara, Katerina and Barbara have all since been paroled.
There has been an absolutely horrific murder this week that was live streamed on Instagram. This case is extremely disturbing, so please be warned before watching. On Friday, 12,000 people watched a Bosnian bodybuilder kill his wife on Instagram Live. 35-year-old Nermin had been abusing his wife during their marriage, and the pair had a young child. On Friday morning, he took to Instagram Live to tell his followers that they could witness a live killing. Absolutely horrifically, he turns the camera to his ex, whose face is completely covered in blood and disfigured. He calls her a derogatory name and blames her for her own death because she reported him to police. Disturbingly, you can hear the child crying in the background. He then tells his followers that he's the child's father and his ex had hidden the toddler from him for over a week and reported him to police for DV. So, in my opinion, yes, she's taking steps to keep her and her child safe from you. After shooting his wife in the head on Instagram, he then goads his followers saying, "Someone come and save the child." A police chase then began and he went on a shooting rampage. He continued to film and tells his viewers that he's killed 2 other people who actually turned out to be an innocent man and his young son. He also wounded a police officer, another man and a woman while on the run. He ended up unaliving himself on the same day.
there, mate? Look in there. What? Look in there.
Mysterious case absolutely does not sit right with me. Someone knows something and has not come forward. On the 12th of July 2015, 18-year-old Tiffany and her parents attended a graduation party in New Jersey. At around 9 p.m, one of Tiffany's friends spoke to her parents and claimed that they were really annoyed because Tiffany had used their debit card without permission. Tiffany initially denied this to her friend, but then did admit this to her mum Diane a little bit later. At this point, they were all outside Tiffany's house, and Diane went inside to find her husband. When she returned outside of the house, Tiffany had vanished. Now, they were able to see Tiffany on the deer cameras that they had outside the house. She appears to be walking down the driveway in her normal clothing and white headband. When they tried to find Tiffany, they actually made a terrifying discovery. Her phone was lying on the floor at the bottom of the driveway. Immediately, they knew something was wrong, as Tiffany never had her phone out of her sight. At 11:30 p.m, her family called the police. Little did they know, 27 minutes earlier, Tiffany had been hit by a train. Frustratingly, pretty much straight away, police presumed this death to be a self-unaliving. However, that just didn't seem to fit with the evidence presented. All of Tiffany's family and friends said how much of an upbeat person she was and that she was really happy at the time. She was making plans for the future, and the autopsy also showed that she had a clean toxicology report. Now, in the deer cam footage, she was fully clothed, but when she was found, she was just in her underwear with no shoes on. Upsettingly, 2 weeks after her death, Tiffany's mum actually found her missing trainers and headband more than a mile away from the tracks. Could someone have murdered Tiffany and then dumped her body on the train tracks to make it look like she did this herself? Tiffany's parents certainly think so. They definitely suspect some foul play was involved. This case made me terrified to go to the cinema. This is the case of the horror in Screen 9. James Holmes was raised in California. His mum was a nurse and his dad was a scientist. From a young age, he was experiencing night terrors and allegedly actually tried to take his own life when he was just 11 years old. He was apparently obsessed with guns and weapons and had dreamed of becoming a mass murderer. Between May and July 2012, he legally bought 4 guns. Background checks were conducted and he was allowed the weapons. He also bought spike strips, which, if you don't know, pop the tyres of cars if they chase after you. On July the 19th, just hours before tragedy would unfold, James mailed his notebook to his psychiatrist. Inside the notebook, James detailed his plans to kill. The notebook was actually discovered later on undelivered. Just prior to entering a cinema in Aurora, James rang a crisis line to tell them about his plans to kill. However, the call was disconnected after just 9 seconds. At the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises, CCTV captures James walking into the cinema. He walks into Screen 9, props open the door, and then walks back out again. Shockingly, he goes to his car and gets guns out and gas canisters. He re-entered the screen at about 12:38 p.m. and set off 2 gas canisters. When he entered Screen 9 again, he immediately opens fire on the audience, instantly killing 10 people. 2 others later died in hospital from their injuries. An additional 70 people were injured. This was an absolutely packed out cinema. James also shot at people as they scrambled to exit the screen. His youngest victim was a 6-year-old girl. Witnesses said this all unfolded as there was actually a gunfight on the screen, and initially they all thought it was special effects and just part of the film. Police were actually on the scene very quickly after the first 911 call. James surrendered to the police and was arrested in the car park. He was apparently very calm when he was arrested and told police that he had booby-trapped his apartment. When police investigated his apartment, this was found out to be true. He was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences.